abused my sick mother growing up. I grew up in a cult and my mom restricted me from doing virtually anything a normal childhood would entail. She made me go to church, didn't let me do sports, and her schizophrenia took a toll on me. She was loving, and always supported me. I remember the times she tried to bond with me as a teen and have simple conversations about her childhood and her feelings. I knew she was delusional at times, and I would call her crazy. I just wanted to be my own person, but to this day I still struggle with insecurities. I used to hit her and tell her horrible things. When I was 13 I told her I wished she would get cancer and die so I didn't have to deal with the emotional neglect. Well, she ended up getting cancer when I was 15. And now that she passed away I look back at all the times I chose to go hang out with friends when she was suffering at home alone sick. I did help her, I rubbed her back and cuddled with her. I told her I loved her. I just didn't believe her cancer was real and I still can't believe she is gone. And I feel so terrible every day. I wish I could see her again and tell her how much I love her and appreciate the love she's shown me despite her mental illness. I put bruises on her and stressed her out immensely in my teens. I just can't cope with the guilt and grievance. I treat my dad with utmost respect now. I am always worried for his health and happiness. But looking back, all he did was work. He wasn't there for her mentally. And neither was I, and it kills me inside. Especially now that I'm a mother. Could have saved someone's life, but didn't. When I was 16 I was walking to work. I looked into one of my neighbor's gardens and saw an old man laying on the ground. I panicked and just speed walked away. I stopped down the road and was going to turn around but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Back then I suffered with big anxiety problems and I just didn't know what to do, so I just went off to work. I got home later that day and my mom told me that the man down the road had died. He was found about an hour after I saw him and died just as he got to hospital. He died from a heart attack. If I called an ambulance when I first saw him there's a huge chance he would have survived. I have lived with this burden for 10 years now and never told anyone. I ran away from home when I was 18 and my mom killed herself shortly after. She said me running away was part of the reason she did it. I am 39 now, so this was a long time ago. I was born in Puerto Rico but me and my parents moved to New Jersey when I was 12. When I was 16, my dad died of a heart attack that none of us expected. My mother was heartbroken. She loved my dad. They had such a ridiculously loving relationship together. It was like a picture-perfect marriage. She was also only 37. After that, I got more reckless in life in general. I started going to NYC a lot more and hanging out constantly with other people. I had a bit of growth spurt and became very tall and pretty, and soon I started working for a modeling agency. My mother hated it. She hated everything I was doing. She thought it was all sinful and filled with drugs and sex and alcohol. She forbid me from going to NYC, but of course I went anyways. I slept around with a lot of men, and she found out eventually, overheard me talking to a friend in my bedroom, and got furious at me. She was hurting so bad over my dad's death, but I didn't care because I was consumed by anger and frustration at her being so restrictive on me. I started going to raves more often, and she really hated those. She saw my skimpy rave outfits and would just start crying, saying my dad would never allow something so terrible. I wanted to emulate Fairuza Balk from the movie The Craft. I got piercings, she hated that. I got tattoos, she really hated that, and I smoked pot, and when she found out about that she nearly called the police on me. She would smack me around sometimes when she was really mad, and I never responded except once when I pushed her back and she just whammed me right in the eye. She was being irrational on some things, but obviously looking back, the crowd I was running with was not exactly a good crowd and she was right to be worried. There was a time where she just had a mental breakdown for like a whole month, leading up to my 18th birthday. Both over me being reckless and partying a lot and also over my dad dying. They were related, because she blamed my dad dying on my reckless behavior, and constantly said that if he were here I wouldn't be like this. She was right, a lot of this was acting out because I was sad and depressed at first. Once I got into it more, it was less acting out and more just that I wanted to be a model, but still. My dad dying was the catalyst for me to go that route. During her breakdown we got into constant fights where she would be crying and yelling at me. I would say I was going to leave at my 18th birthday and she would go from angry to sad and begging me not to go because she needs someone to stay with her. This was also around the time I had started to do coke a lot. She kept on begging me not to leave, but I just didn't care. I was selfish and greedy and I didn't care that I was leaving my poor, depressed, grieving mother behind. More than anything, it was my burgeoning coke addiction which fueled this. I went from doing coke maybe once a month before, to doing it once every few days. I wanted to be closer to NYC and wanted to just get away so I could do more coke. I sometimes wonder if maybe I would have seen reason and stayed with my mom if my mind wasn't constantly focused on cocaine. Another factor was that her anger and restricting side, in my mind, overrode any empathy I had over her being sad. I didn't see her as a grieving person, I just saw her as a bitch who was trying to keep me down. So I left, at 18. 3 days after my birthday we got into a massive fight and I just packed my stuff and went away to go live with my friend Ivy in Williamsburg, pre-gentrification, back when it was mostly Borka still. I had already stayed with Ivy for days at a time before, she had a spare bedroom, why not? We got calls nearly every day from my mom. Usually Ivy would pick up, saying my mom was crying in Spanish and was incomprehensible. I was just happy to be away. I didn't respond to her calls. I was partying, sleeping with guys, I could smoke pot in the apartment, I could cook whatever I wanted. I was so happy. Then one day I picked up, and she was so happy to hear my voice, and I just told her that I don't want her harassing me, that I can be on my own without her worrying constantly, that I don't need her anymore and I don't want her restricting me constantly. Then I found out that my mom killed herself. Maybe 4 to 5 weeks after I moved away. She left a note which basically laid out why she did it. She was horribly depressed because she lost her husband, her friends, apparently she had a lot of drama with her friends about a year before. She used to be very social but then barely went out, and now she has lost her daughter. The note was specifically supposed to be for her family back in Puerto Rico. I still don't know if it was intended for me to read it. She described me as her sunshine, her angel, and she would have done anything for me, but now I was gone forever and she has nothing in her life. She kept on saying she was losing her faith in God. She must have said that about 5 times in the suicide note. It was the worst thing I had ever gone through. This was worse than losing my dad. I just felt a wave of horror come over me that I had done this, that this was my fault, that I was a terrible person and that I abandoned my mother when she needed me the most. Ivy and my other friends didn't even know what to do. I had spent the past year with them constantly complaining about her. My entire demeanor changed. I went from happy and fun to just sad and moody and acting out and binging on drugs alone in my room. Anyways, I would go on to become a cokehead. Well, I already was before my mom died, but it got worse, and my work in modeling came to a standstill. I went to rehab at 22, then moved back to Puerto Rico to my aunt and uncle's place to get away from drugs. Yes, I know Puerto Rico has a ton of drugs, this was on a rural farm area though, for a year. Anyways, it's been so many years since then, but I still think about it all the time. She was an amazing person even though she wasn't really herself in that last year of hysterics and despair. The thing which actually made me write this was a television show I watched, The Haunting of Hill House, because the mother in that, Olivia, reminded me so much of my own mother before my dad died and she went crazy. I'm 1 year married to my new husband. I'm a completely different person now than I was when I was 17. I don't drink or do drugs or anything like that. I went through years of therapy to deal with what happened with my mom and the guilt about it, and realizing how selfish I had been and everything. It sucks, and I am guilty, partially, there is no real denying that. I was horrible to my mom and ran away the first chance I could, but I have learned to live with the guilt at least. 2 kids died at my birthday party. Now I'm 18 and I wish it had been me and not them. On my 15th birthday 2 boys, who were also 15 died. They were guests, but at some point during the night they went skating and were hit by a drunk driver who fled the scene, immediately after he realized what he had done. Within minutes the word spread and my parents forced me to ask everyone to leave. The next day it was everywhere, Facebook, Twitter, Insta bios, Snap, and on every television screen within a 5-mile radius. Every local news outlet was milking the tragic story for ratings, and the locals were crowding around like scavengers. Me being the immature idiot I was at 15, I refused to accept that my party played into their death. That day something sinister began to brew in my heart, and it was hatred towards them for dying. I was bitter because my birthday party had ended so abruptly, and because June 20th was no longer a day that brought me joy, it was now a day of mourning. I was so blinded by rage and self-pity, that I didn't even attend their funeral. Everyone else went, even my parents, but not me. I couldn't bring myself to say, sorry for your loss. Twice. How was I supposed to look them in the eye, without collapsing under their gaze? I couldn't. I didn't know what empathy meant, because the only person I could sympathize for was myself. Now I'm 18 and moving on with my life, that was taken away from them. They died at 15, the stone above them keeps them from aging, and on their birthdays all they get is roses because their parents can't buy them the gift of life. I like to think they were happy before they died, it's the only thought that brings me peace at these hours. If I could give them my life, I would, but I can't and it hurts. They were so much more deserving of life. I'm sorry.